Today, I have a great guest to help me go through some big stories. Trump is getting ready to make big changes within the energy sector. Biden is down at the G20 Brazil summit, touring the rainforest and letting people know that humans are the worst thing on planet Earth and we're destroying the planet. To help me go through all this, I have Gregory Wrightstone. Gregory, thank you for joining me.
Oh, good to be on. Yeah, there's a lot going on in the world of energy and climate hysteria. So we've got it's what Chuck Yeager, the World War II and Korea ace, would call a target-rich environment for us to shoot at today.
Okay. Well, so just some background. Greg is a geologist, the executive director of CO2 Coalition. He's also a best-selling author of A Very Convenient Warming. Greg, as you know, life has become very expensive. Energy became expensive, which made everything else expensive. We were told that was necessary to save the planet. We were told that was necessary in order to stick it to Vladimir Putin. So many different things. The European Union, the World Economic Forum, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, just to name a few, they now want America to spend trillions of dollars on their climate change agenda. Where's this money going to come from, and will it even make a difference?
Boy, there's a lot to unpack in there. What we see, and we will eventually get to this. A lot of the people with their hands out are the presidents and prime ministers of these island nations that are going to be underwater supposedly in a couple of decades, and they're wanting billions and billions or sometimes trillions of dollars because of climate justice, that they're going to be underwater. In fact, let's just, if you don't mind, let's just go right there to dispel that, since I'm on it. Let's talk about that. That's one of the biggest falsehoods that are being spread about sea level rise and the islands that'll be underwater. Well, the most at-risk island nation in the world, according to the UN, is the Maldives in the Indian Ocean. It's, I think the highest point's 10 feet above sea level. Most of it's just a couple feet above sea level. And so they're telling us that they're going to be underwater in a couple of decades. 15,000 years ago, the Maldives were also just above sea level. In the last 15,000 years, sea level has risen 400 feet. 400 feet. Why are the islands not under 400 feet of water, you might ask me? And Stephen, I would say that's a pretty good question. Thank you for bringing it up. It's because of a geologic process known as accretion. Of course, the corals, these are coral atolls for the most part. Corals grow very quickly, so they can keep up with really rapid paces of sea level rise. And then it's these coral reefs are busted up in hurricanes. Things like, actually, the parrotfish is one of the big consumers. It chomps on the coral, and the coral comes in one end and gets put out the other end of the parrotfish. And we have a lot of gravels and sands that are created, and those get brought up onto the island through accretion. The winds blow the sands up on the island. Critters and island animals move these sediments around, and these islands slowly grow as sea level rises. And you've probably never heard that, and is my guess. And I know when I told you we had 400 feet of sea level rise, I saw you went like this. You said, "What?" And it's true. And so sea level is rising at 7 inches per century. All right. That's barely above your ankles in 100 years. So what they're telling you is, at this rate of sea level rise, we're going to have, by 2050, it will have another 2.5 or 3 inches of sea level rise. So the last 400 feet of sea level rise didn't put that island nation underwater, but that next 2 inches, look out, they're going to be underwater. And the other thing, the Maldives, if you Google Forbes and Maldives, you'll learn there are 14 resort complexes being built in 4 new airports. Millions of dollars of investment with equity companies, and they're all insured by multinational insurance companies that avoid risk like the plague. Would they insure these facilities if they were going to be underwater in a couple of decades? Heck no. they're in the business to ensure safe things. And so when you look at it that way, that's just one example of how you and your viewers are being lied to.
Yeah,
And
I wondered, some of the biggest complainers about global warming, climate change, sea level rising, they all have beachfront property. And those beachfront properties, like you say, they have insurance companies. So why would they build if they know their house is going to be underwater? And why would an insurance company take on that risk?
exactly. And I'll tell you another, Stephen. We just moved to our home in Florida 4 months ago, south of Tampa. And everybody, before I moved there, everybody said, "Oh, don't worry, Tampa never gets hit by a hurricane." And 3 hurricanes later, 2 hurricanes later, here we are. We didn't. My home was not damaged, but I made the most horrifically bad decision during Milton was to evacuate to the east coast of Florida to Vero Beach, which, if you recall, there were just a huge spate of tornadoes. A couple dozen tornadoes had touched down. Actually, where we were staying, we got hit by a tornado. So I evacuated, and the tornadoes hit at 4:30 in the afternoon, and the hurricane didn't make landfall until 4 hours later. And the funny thing was, I was doing another similar interview, live streaming, audio video interview with conservative commandos as the tornado hit. It was the interviewer loved it. He said, "This is the best because the lights are flashing on and out. There's crashing, and it was good until my cable went out. We finished it up then on the phone." He said, "That's the best interview ever." As Greg gets hit by a tornado, fleeing Hurricane Milton, and the point of that story is I was directly involved in this, and I took a look at landfalling hurricanes, and that's the best thing we have for the United States to measure hurricanes, because until we get to the satellite era, which started in 1979, from 79 on, we know every single hurricane that rises up, peters out. But before that, there were a lot of hurricanes just were never recorded because they blossom and then kind of die or never make it to. But landfalling hurricanes, we know every single hurricane that's made landfall into the United States going back to 1850. And we took a look at landfalling hurricanes for the United States, have been in a decline since 1850. And I looked at Florida. Florida landfalling hurricanes have also been in slight decline. And so, once again, the narrative is disputed by the science, the facts, and the data. And that's what we bring to the subject here at the CO2 Coalition, is to show what are the climate facts compared to the climate fiction that you and your viewers are subjected to. Your viewers are subjected to climate lies on a continuing basis, and that's what they are. And we have to call it out. That's part of our job as scientists, is to show what the truth is, to show what the science is. And it angers me. That's how I got into this, Stephen, is first I knew as a geologist, some of the things about climate change we're being told was just wrong. And that the main thing was ocean acidification, which I knew was a falsehood. And I looked into other things, and what I learned was this was really my own personal exploration for the truth. And what I found, frankly, angered me, that there were scientists out there providing information and on climate change. They're spreading disinformation about this.
Okay. Just going back to the first part of my question, how do they pay for the trillions of dollars that the Paris Climate Accord wants, the European Union, World Economic Forum? I mean, to me, this is just one more abuse on American taxpayers. Meanwhile, China, India, they're not going to do anything to clean up their behavior. Today's economic environment is still really stressful for a lot of us, but with the Fed finally dropping rates, there is no better time than now to put you and your family in a better financial position. If you're a homeowner, American Financing is helping thousands of families just like you who have been putting everyday expenses on credit cards get out from underneath the debt by tapping into their home's equity. American Financing is saving their borrowers over $800 a month on average. $800 a month is like $10,000. Now, it costs absolutely nothing to find out how much you can save. They are closing some in as little as 10 days. And if you start today, you may not have to make the next 2 mortgage payments. There is no better time than now to turn your situation around. I want you to reach out to my friends at American Financing. Call 888-686-8030. That's 888-686-8030. Or visit americanfinancing.net/Gardner. All right, let's get back to this interview.
No, they're not. Well, the answer is they're not going to get it, especially not with the incoming Trump administration. There's no way. And there is. We're actually trying to fund. It's like climate reparations is what they're calling it. There is no reparation to be repaired because there is no climate crisis. I document that in my new book. Earlier in my first book, we documented there wasn't a climate crisis, and that's for sure. That's easily disproved. But in this new book, and what we at the CO2 Coalition talk about a lot about is about the combination of modest warming and more CO2 just being highly beneficial to both our ecosystems. By almost every metric we look at, our ecosystems are thriving and prospering, and humanity's benefiting in multiple ways from this combination of warming and more CO2. And so the answer to your question is they're not going to be getting money from the United States. They've not really been getting much at all, and they shouldn't get one. If we're going to do international aid, that's one thing, but don't base it on this false notion of climate crisis.
Okay. Donald Trump over the weekend announced that he's tapping Liberty Energy CEO Chris Wright to lead the U.S. Energy Department. This is somebody that is pro-fossil fuel, pro-energy independence, pro-energy dominance. What are your thoughts on Trump bringing somebody in that is kind of the opposite of Biden and this green energy agenda?
Yeah, I had a chance to sit down with Chris, met him in his office one Saturday morning. We met for about an hour. This was a little over a year ago. He is really, really good. If you go to Liberty Energy, I encourage you to go to his website, their website, Liberty Energy, and click on ESG, Environmental, Science, and Governance, which is it's supposed to be for the Bidens a really woke statement of what your company's going to do. Read his. I could have written that book. It's really, really, really good. So his ESG manual it's basically, he turned the tables on what they thought ESG should be. And he's a really strong guy. He's not going to be bullied. He speaks the truth and won't back down. And he's going to advance American independent energy. We can be not just America. We cannot just be. There it is. Yeah, it's bettering human lives is the title, and it goes. How are we bettering human lives? Providing reliable, abundant, affordable energy, and that's what he talks about in this. And it's really well done. And I was. He's a colleague, and I think he's going to be doing very well. One of the other appointments, not so much, is Doug Burgum from North Dakota. He's part of this cabal of GOP governors up in the northern states: Kristi Noem, Doug Burgum, Gordon in Wyoming, that want to decarbonize the West. They're saying, well, we want to keep doing coal-fired electricity, and in order to do that, we have to capture the carbon. So what they want to do is add these carbon capture technologies to the coal-fired plants that they have. And the problem with that is it's really, really expensive. It's almost $1 billion to retrofit an existing coal-fired plant. And not only that, the energy, it's really, really energy intensive. I've seen numbers 24% up to over 30% of the electricity that's generated is used in the carbon capture process. And so not only is it going to be really expensive to put it into the plants? It's going to take so much of the energy, makes all that the remaining energy that finally gets put into the grid is incredibly more expensive. And they're stripping the life-giving molecule, we call it the miracle molecule of carbon dioxide. They call it the demon molecule, but we see that more CO2 is hugely, hugely beneficial, again, to our ecosystems. And those ecosystems include crops that are breaking records year after year after year in both the hot countries and cold countries.
How come there's some scientists that say CO2 is going to be the death of the planet and humanity, and other scientists that are saying we're actually short, we need more? The plants are starving for the very molecule they breathe to stay alive.
Yeah, if you look at the big picture, and as a geologist, don't look at the last 50 or 100 or 150 years. You have to put this in the long-term perspective. We've been in a 140 million year decline of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We got very close during the last ice advance to reaching what I call the line of death, and that's 150 parts per million. We got to about 180 parts per million. If we had crossed that, that line of death is the minimum amount of CO2 for plant life to exist, and we nearly got there. The average CO2 level in the atmosphere is about 2,600 parts per million, and so we've declined from about that to nearly crossing that line of death. Today, thankfully, we've had about a 50% increase. We're up to 420 parts per million, which is still, in the big picture, we're still actually seeing CO2 starvation right now. We don't have too much CO2. We don't have enough. Right now, again, we're a little over 400 parts per million. Our scientists here that study this, and we can go to CO2Coalition.org to learn about some of these things. The main benefits of increasing CO2 for plant life and for crops is around 10,000 parts per million. That's when it'll continue. If we add more CO2, we'll continue benefiting crops, but just not as high of a rate. And so that's 2.5 times what it is today. And we wouldn't get there for a couple of centuries at this rate. And it's what they're warning us about is increasing CO2. It's a greenhouse gas. It has a warming effect, but they emphasize the warming effect it has. We see it being very modest and beneficial.
Okay. Donald Trump, during his run for president, said many, many times, America is the best at refining and producing energy in a clean way. But meanwhile, Biden is going to Iran and Venezuela and other countries that produce it, and it produces significantly more pollution. Is there truth to that?
A little bit. The main thing, there is a little bit that if you look at an oil drilling rig or a gas drilling rig in Azerbaijan or Texas, they're fairly similar. Maybe they aren't as environmentally conscious as we are, but where it really comes into effect is when we talk about the critical minerals and the rare earth minerals that are needed for his clean, so-called clean, I'm going to use air hooks on clean energy proposals. That's really environmentally destructive, because to get these things like neodymium and other elements that I can't pronounce, these rare earth animals, or cobalt, they're being mined by boys, 8, 10, 12-year-old boys in the Congo that are sent into the cobalt to get the cobalt out, and it's slave labor in China to create the solar panels. And it's when they mine these critical minerals and environmental, they don't. You can just Google that or go to a web search, and you can just see the destruction of these. It's stripping operations with really no environmental controls. Those are the really big ones. If we use natural gas as an example, when we burn natural gas, it is the cleanest burning of all of the fossil fuels we have. And it's mainly methane, which is CH4, one carbon and four hydrogen atoms that are bonded. And when we burn it, it combines with oxygen and yields two molecules of water vapor and one molecule of CO2. So we're creating twice as much water when we burn methane than we do carbon dioxide. And one example, we've got a paper that's just before I got the final version back, just before I came on air with you, what on the CO2 sources of CO2. Our paper is confirming that yes, the increase in CO2 is from us. It's from our burning of CO2. And one of the interesting things is that oxygen, atmospheric oxygen, and I reckon you don't know this either, but maybe you do. Our oxygen is actually declining very slightly in the atmosphere. And the reason for that is, say, well, wait a minute, plants are growing, our ecosystems are thriving. So as they're doing that, they're sucking in CO2 and they're putting out a lot more oxygen. That's true, except during the process of using hydrocarbons, we're consuming oxygen. And there's nothing dangerous. It's very slight, right? I mean, there's no danger there. But I thought it was fascinating that we're actually that's affecting. So do we have an effect on the atmosphere? Sure. Is there a warming effect from CO2? Sure, but it's very minor and greatly overwhelmed by the natural forces that have been driving temperatures since the dawn of time.
Okay. You brought up methane. I read last week that Bill Gates, one of the biggest pushers of the mRNA COVID shots, now wants to give these specialized vaccines to cows so that they won't fart as much, creating methane that's killing humans and planet Earth. What, I mean, is this guy just crazy? I mean, really,
Yes.
we're going to focus on cow farts?
No, in fact, if you go, we had Dr. Richard Lindzen, one of the world's top physicists from MIT, wrote a paper for us last year on methane. And the amount of it, is it a greenhouse gas? Yes. Does it have a warming effect? Yes, but it's incredibly small. And he documents in this. Again, go to CO2coalition.org and use the search bar there. Just type in methane, and you can come up with a number of uh, readable papers. Lindzen's is pretty technical, but we have others. Dr. William Happer's our chair, and he's got a pretty good one on the, he called it methane, the irrelevant molecule, on just an incredibly small amount of warming effect. And they're using that, what they're doing to methane. We were approached by persons in the anesthesia association that came to us. They said some of our members, we're getting a lot of strong push to either discontinue or reduce the use of these various anesthesia molecules. You've probably not heard about that either, but you're about to, because again, I've just got another paper and our report's ready for publication, maybe later today, where we actually looked at it. Nitrous oxide is the biggest anesthesia that's in use. And there's other things called dexflurane and hexflurane. And they're really and they're greenhouse gases. But we looked at how much warming will occur in the next 50 years and 100 years. I don't have the numbers up, but at 0 point, then a lot of zeros before you get to the next decimal of warming that will happen in 50 and 100 years. It's so incredibly small. But yet they want you to reduce your anesthesia. I mean, I don't want to wake up in the middle of a procedure. It'd be a little uncomfortable to wake up in the middle of that colonoscopy while they're still going on, but for no reason. But there hadn't been anything written, so we're actually publishing. Like I say, it might be later today. Will be a definitive study on just the ridiculous proposals, just that. And that's what we do here at the CO2 Coalition. We've got almost 200 scientists here, engineers, physicists. I'm a geologist that deal with things like this, and we stay away from the politics. and we stick to the science. And I think that's done very well for us, uh, to be science based and no politics at all.
Yeah. Elon Musk wrote on Twitter, probably a year ago, but it stuck out to me. He said, essentially, everyone's so worried about global warming that we can handle. It's global cooling that we should really be afraid of. What did he mean by that?
Oh, yeah, that's one of my favorite topics, and I devote a whole section in my new book about to that. It's the
Okay.
strong relationship between human history and climate history, and it's fascinating, this relationship. And what we look, they would call me, and do call me, a climate denier and a science denier. I would call them history deniers, because they're denying what history tells us about climate and human health. And what history tells us is that the warmer periods, we're in a warming trend, there's no doubt. But these other previous warming trends that were warmer than it is today were just hugely beneficial to humanity. Great empires and civilizations rose up, and it was the intervening cold periods that were just horrific.
Okay. Interesting.
And so, if we go back, you have to excuse me. If we just go back to the first great civilizations, it was during what was called the Minoan warm period, or the Bronze Age, and those great civilizations, the Hittites, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Harappan Empire in the Indus River Valley, these great China, old Egypt, all these great civilizations rose up during a period that was really much, much warmer than it is today. They thrived. Food was abundant. Life was good. And they all collapsed within what might be a 50 or 100-year period. It was called the Late Bronze Age collapse. Don't believe me? Just use those three words in a Google search or web search, Late Bronze Age collapse, and you'll find that all these civilizations in a fairly short period of time all collapsed. And it was because it went from hot and had a significant temperature drop. And then we went into what was called the Greek Dark Ages for centuries. We just don't know a whole lot about that period because these great civilizations pretty much just evaporated. And so if you were, and then it didn't get better until the Roman warm period, the time of Christ. It again started getting cold. There are a lot of reasons for the collapse of the Roman Empire. Temperature, I believe, was one. Then we went into the Dark Ages after and then again we had the medieval warm period that was warmer than today. And for example, the Roman warm period, the Romans uh, were growing citrus in the north of England near Hadrian's Wall. Well, you can't grow citrus there now. It was we have historical documentation that when you tell people that, they go, oh yeah, it had to be warmer. They don't want to know what isotopes and carbon isotope proxies that we calculate, but they understand that. They also would understand that olive groves were grown 80 and 100 and 150 miles farther north in Europe than they are today. And so people understand it had to be warmer. And then the last cooling period after the medieval warm period was the Little Ice Age. And again, it was horrific. It led to crop failure, famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation. As much as a third of the population of the world perished at that time. Glaciers descended across Europe and the northern hemisphere in France, Germany, swallowing up towns and villages. And then it started warming up again. And that's the modern warming trend that we're in right now. It's been warming for more than 300 years, long before the first Model T rolled off the assembly line. And we should be welcome the warmth. Think what it's doing. It's warmed again, starting more than 300 years ago. The growing season in the continental United States has increased more than 2 weeks since 1900. That's a good thing. That's a really, really, really good thing for crops. Just think if you've got a fruit orchard, what's your greatest fear? It's a late spring killing frost, isn't it? And because of this warming, they have fewer of these. And again, we get more plantings, and that's just turbocharged by increasing carbon dioxide, which is fueling what we call the carbon dioxide fertilization effect, with more CO2 driving plant growth, warming with longer growing seasons, and then judicial use of primarily nitrogen-based fertilizers. Those three things together are, if you look in the book again, I take the 8 top crops in the world in terms of tonnage per acre, and we look at, they're just breaking records year after year after year after year, and they'll continue to do so well into the future. So agriculture productivity is probably the greatest benefit we've seen from climate change. And one of if I could just go on, one of the other benefits, what we're seeing is that that we've got people telling. I just got back from Ojai, California. We traveled there last weekend to fight a stupid rule that they were going to impose on the city of Ojai, and what we looked at there, most in the Ojai resolution, the big thing was, and we see it time and again, is that warming is going to cause huge increases in mortality, loss of life. But yet, if we look at the facts, Dr. Antonio Gasparini and a team of his other physicians around the world looked at 74 million temperature-related deaths, and we find that 20 times as many people die from cold as from heat. So
Wow.
again, a recent study said it was 15 times, whatever it is, a lot more people die from cold as from heat.
Yeah. I remember, when I first started getting big into the news, there was like a cold snap down in Texas, and there were, all these senior citizens that died in their homes from being cold. And I'm in Utah. I'm thinking, why wouldn't you just put on a blanket or something, but almost all the deaths that I see are cold related. They're not even from being too warm.
It is. And what's not funny, it's the oddity about this is I have a section in my book. I go into it in some detail. If you look at heat related deaths after a heat wave, there's an increase in deaths, but then over the next few months, there's actually the people that did the work said they called it a mortality shadow, that people that probably would have died during that time, there's actually a decrease in mortality that can be measured after the heat wave. So what the heat wave is doing is taking the most susceptible people that were probably about ready to kick anyhow, and and took them. You don't see that with cold related deaths. Cold related deaths is kind of an equal opportunity killer, and we've seen with COVID, we've learned that a lot of the flus, COVID, and the like survive and breed in the cold weather months, and we saw that too during the Dark Ages with the spread of all these diseases, the bubonic, the various diseases spread rapidly during this very cold period in the Little Ice Age, and so these people huddled together for warmth in their cabins closely, and it was the cold that drove people together. And so again, cold kills huge numbers of people compared to heat. And what does that tell you? A rational person would say global warming saves lives, and probably millions of lives. And when the people like, oh, you can't say that. Well, yes, I can. I just did. And it's backed up by the data. But they don't want to hear that. And again, I'll accuse Al Gore, John Kerry, and the rest of them. They're history deniers, denying what history tells us.
Okay. Under President Biden, the Democrats passed this multi-trillion-dollar bill called the Inflation Reduction Act. Data shows it actually increased inflation, made life more expensive. And then Biden, just a few months ago, in a press conference, says, actually, it was just a green energy bill that we disguised. We probably shouldn't have named it the Inflation Reduction Act. Some of the things they did in there, $9 billion to build 7 electric car charging stations, $42 billion for internet, and 0 Americans have internet from that $42 billion. Are these green energy bills? Are these a grift? Is this just ways of making money using fear porn to get money out of the American taxpayer?
It is, and you use the correct words there. Is fear, and what they are. There's a huge amount of money that's invested in this. That people are be making billions of dollars in this, and it's all to solve a non-existent problem. I call it a solution in search of a problem. It's really horrible what they're doing. They could be using that money to actually fight real problems that are here at home and abroad, but instead they're dumping it into these programs that'll benefit their buddies and their colleagues in the wind and the solar markets, EV markets, which are going downhill. Apparently, the EV sales have collapsed over the last. Well, it's really started a year and a half or so ago. People just don't want to buy them. They're expensive. They're not very effective. Apparently, there are only a limited number of uber wealthy people that want the virtue signal, and I think each one of them have already bought an EV, and so they might have maxed out on the virtue signaling uber wealthy amongst us. So it's incredible the amount of money that's been put in there. And Trump, when he gets in, and with his energy secretary and everything he can do, let's just cut off the spending. We've also got a huge number of COVID dollars, many millions of dollars that haven't been spent yet. Has nothing to do with climate, but still, let's stop spending money.
Yeah, I read that between now and next summer, they plan to spend another $70 billion on COVID. Like for what? Just because Congress already passed that, so you're going to spend it? Why not reappropriate that to other things? I mean, again, I'm not a scientist. I don't even pretend to be one. But when I go out in the valley in Salt Lake City, I'm way more concerned with the pollution I can see with my eyeballs than the CO2 molecule that my body seems to be able to handle just fine when I'm out walking around. I don't know. I feel like sometimes they put major focus on minor things and minor focus on major things.
That's what it is. They've turned it on its head. It's incredible. And by the way, I didn't know you were talking to me from Salt Lake City. We just finished up a billboard campaign out there. It was maybe you've seen it. It was probably 6 months ago. It ended. There was a woman resting gently in bed, and the title was on the billboard said, "Sleep well. There is no climate crisis," and it was great. People, as they were driving by, people's heads were exploding. They go, "What? You can't say that!" And in fact, we've got a wonderful education series of books. We're concerned about the state of science education in America, and we've actually done something about it. We've published a series of books. We've got a series of science-based videos, and each one of these has a lesson plan that's created by Dr. Sharon Camp, a PhD in chemistry, and an AP Science reader and teacher. And so we're catering to the homeschool community. All of my grandchildren, I've got actually 3.95 grandchildren. That's right. My daughter's due in about 2 weeks. And so all my grandchildren are homeschooled. And what we're doing is providing these homeschooling parents some resources they're being used in charter schools. And my new book that the latest in this series, I call it the Sleep Well series, since we were talking about sleep well, there is no climate crisis. The title of the book is Chloe the Clownfish Sleeps Well at Night. And it's just wonderfully illustrated. We have a full-time artist in Brazil by the name of Tiago Hellinger da Silva, and his artwork is stunning. We've done it manga style. So Chloe we're using the story of a clownfish on the Great Barrier Reef that's been told that her home is in peril and they're all going to die. And we use this to tell the story of what's actually happening on the Great Barrier Reef. And I enlisted Dr. Peter Ridd, one of the top coral experts and Great Barrier Reef experts, worked with me on this. And we found out that actually his work shows that there's more coral cover today than there has been since they started measuring this in the 1980s. Not only that, coral growth is much higher to the north in what's called the Great Coral Triangle of Indonesia, Malaysia. That temperature of the water there is 2 and 3 degrees Celsius warmer than the Great Barrier Reef. But people go there, they flock there for the corals. It's the greatest amount of fish and coral development in the world. And the Great Barrier Reef, it's corals like it warm, and the warmer the better. And you won't hear that. Corals really like hot water. And in fact, the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef, remember it's in the southern hemisphere, is significantly colder than the northern part. And that southern part grows at about half the rate as the northern part. Because again, who's heard that? Nobody. Nobody's heard that. All we hear is death, destruction, bleaching. 50% of the reef is dead. No, it's not. No, it's not. And so we're using this educational material to get the truth out in an engaging and entertaining way.
Cool. Very cool. Well, I think, with the Trump administration coming in, whether you like them or not, I think it's going to be a golden age of fossil fuel energy, natural gas, not demonizing American workers that just want affordable groceries and fuel expenses. In our final minutes together, Greg, tell me about your book, A Very Convenient Warming, and then I'll put a direct link to it.
Yeah, the title is A Very Convenient Warming, How Modest Warming and More CO2 Are Benefiting Humanity. It's again, we've taken the step beyond there is no climate crisis to you're darn right there's not a climate crisis in the world. Ecosystems and humanity is thriving and prospering. And to look for it, just search for convenient warming, those two words, convenient warming. It'll take you to my website, buy directly, or a lot of people buy it on Amazon. It's just so easy. But the CO2 Coalition, again, we are the tip of the spear providing science, facts, and data about climate change. And you can go to co2coalition.org, co2coalition.org to learn more. It's a wonderful site. We have a section there, a tab called Climate Facts. Click on that and see easily understood charts and facts that you may not know.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to put a direct link to the CO2 Coalition as well as an Amazon link to your book. Greg, thank you so much for what you're doing, coming out. I think the fact that science won't question science isn't science at all. I think it's good to question things, and I think we're coming into a new era of questioning.
I'll leave you with one quote from Richard Feynman, the great physicist. He says, "I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." And that's what we have right now.
Okay, great. Gregory Wrightstone, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.